players, you may begin.
In the booth with Reed Duke. That means we're in the top 8. We got our first quarterfinal match lined up for you here. Alfredo Torres playing against Seth Manfield, #1 in the world, and looking to extend that lead as well is Seth Manfield here. He came in to this weekend facing down 2 potential contenders for Player of the Year. That's you, Reed, and also Luis Salvato. Luis actually did pick up a point in his run for Seth, which doesn't actually tie him or put him ahead, though, so he still needs something else to make that happen. But Seth is looking to kind of try to close the door on both Luis and you, Reed, by putting up a huge finish here and just saying, hey, guys, don't even bother anymore. I got this one. We'll see what he can do here in the top 8. We've got a black-red. I hesitate to call this one a mirror because the subtle differences between these decks has actually become an important factor in Standard.
Yeah, that's something we'll keep an eye on, Marshall, is we do have 4 copies of decks that are red and black in our top 8, but Seth Manfield setting himself apart with a much different strategy, going a little bigger, turning to Planeswalkers, Karn, Scion of Urza, Chandra, Torch of Defiance. You won't find Bomat Courier or Hazoret the Fervent in his build. He's much more of a dedicated mid-range or even controlling slanted type of deck.
Built for the mirror or built for the traditional?
I would say so. It's impossible to get a big edge in the mirror, right? Just when so many of the cards are the same and when so many of the cards are so punishing, you're never going to win 70% of your matches. You're probably never even going to win 60% of your matches. But what you can do is you can eschew those 1 toughness creatures to insulate yourself a little bit against Goblin Chain Whirler, prevent yourself from blowouts, and then when you're able to win a close game where you didn't lose a card to the Chain Whirler, that's when you know that your deck building decisions have paid off at least a little bit.
Well, who needs creatures anyway? Seth Manfield kills both of Alfredo Torres' creatures. But this is a big turn now for Alfredo because 4 mana is where the heavy hitters start, and here's one of them, Chandra, Torch of Defiance. Immediately plus. So we're going to see Seth Manfield fall down to 14. It ended up being Hazoret that got exiled there, but so it goes.
And the exact loyalty numbers on these Planeswalkers can be such a big deal because Seth, of course, threatening to attack for 4. If he can pair it with a Chain Whirler for 1 last point of damage.
Oh, there it is. Goblin Chain Whirler knocks her loyalty down to 4. Crew up the Heart of Kirin, and boom, Chandra's out of here. Boy.
It makes me wonder, too, if Seth had the Chain Whirler last turn because he could have picked off the Bomat Courier for free. So maybe if you're Alfredo Torres, you're thinking, oh, well, he didn't play it when he had a good opportunity. Maybe my Chandra will be safe. Nothing doing.
Goodness sakes. Another good turn here for Alfredo, though. He uses Cut to take out the only creature left for Seth Manfield and then plays his own copy of said creature, the Goblin Chain Whirler here.
Wow, look, and Seth actually taking a defensive posture here. He doesn't crack in with the Heart of Kirin. I think that's because his hand is very strong. You can see he's been missing land drops, so presumably has 3 or 4 or 5 spells still waiting there, and he knows that if the game is to go long, he'll have an advantage that way, so no need to get into a race.
Well, it looks like Alfredo's last card was yet another removal spell. Unlicensed Disintegration is going to kill the Heart of Kirin, and that's going to allow the Chain Whirler to get in for 3 damage, knocking Seth down to 10, but Alfredo is out of gas at this point.
Out of gas and also out of energy, Marshall. That was a fairly precious mana that he spent there because you will see that cut ribbons hanging out in his graveyard. That ordinarily would be a pretty big part of his plan with Seth Manfield's life total dropping, but now he needs to find 2 sources of black mana before he can cast that.
Chandra, Torch of Defiance for Seth Manfield. Plus to make mana and then cast a replacement Heart of Kirin. What did he top deck? Nothing yet. Canyon Slough gets cycled. And he just finds another land, but...
break even.
Yeah. It is at least a black mana source for him. Once again, Seth Manfield just playing the tempo game here, plus Chandra to make mana. Play a Glory Bringer now. He's going to use a loyalty from Chandra to crew up Heart of Kirin, and this is a huge attack here. Exert Glory Bringer, kill that thing. You take 11?
Yeah, I don't think there's any way Alfredo can come back. He can't stabilize the board, and he can't kill Seth this turn.
Boy, it just gets out of control so quickly. You see the players jockeying for position over and over again. But in the end, when one player finally gets that one big turn, it can be so difficult to come back. Here's Hazaret the Fervent, though, off the top for Alfredo. And Seth just says, sure, I'm just going to cash in a loyalty here.
Yeah, and then Seth can just attack with the Scrounger and plus the Chandra for the remaining 5.
Yep. Easy finish there for Seth Manfield, and life as usual for him. 1-0 here over Alfredo.
Yep, smooth sailing so far.
I had a little chat with Seth after he secured top 8, and he said he was actually feeling a little nervous, a little tension about it. He's like a little edgy all day today. And I told him from the outside it doesn't look like it. He always looks kind of nervous, but I just meant it's just another day for Seth Manfield. X2 cruising through the field.
He's been here before, that's for sure.
Yeah, and he's like, yeah, I guess so.
Something we were kind of touching on in our earlier conversation, Marshall. Seth Manfield is a player who I think takes every single match he plays quite seriously, feels a lot of pressure, and finds a way to use that pressure to fuel him. Some people, they feel pressure, high-profile situation under the lights, and they sort of crumble from that. But Seth, I think, gains energy from it, and it helps him bring out the best in himself as a player.
Yeah, you think that's a natural, that's just part of the makeup of somebody's kind of psyche, or is that a learned thing?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Seth certainly has a drive for competition, doesn't like losing, loves to be a champion.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all, I think, ingrained personality traits, but having been in the situation and learning how to navigate those feelings and emotions, that's part of it as well.
I kind of assumed Seth didn't have feelings or emotions and was just like an automaton built to play Magic, but maybe I was wrong about that. He is a machine, I know that. Number 1 in the world right now as well.
Mm-hmm.
Pro Tour champion, world champion. I got to, speaking of Alfredo Torres on the other side of the table here, is pretty cool. I happened to walk by right as he won his winning in, and he had his friends with him, and big hugs and high fives and fist pumps. It was awesome.
That's great. You love to see that. That's the other side of the coin, right? Seth and whatever, our guy on the floor could probably tell us, but I'm guessing his 16th or 17th Grand Prix top 8.
Mm-hmm.
Still a really big deal, especially when he's playing for so much. He's got to be thrilled with that. But it doesn't have the same excitement as the first or second time that you have a great finish, Mm-hmm. So to see the joy of someone like Alfredo Torres in cracking through to the top 8 is pretty special. That's something unique about these big tournaments.
Yeah, it's
something that I love to see every single weekend.
It's a big reminder,
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite little gifs, little video is the one of you and Owen and everybody. Owen used to run it on his stream, the one of you guys freaking out at the top 8 announcement at the Pro Tour.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I like seeing that side from you guys because it kind of gets beaten out of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You play these tournaments every weekend, and I've had some chats with my friends before who have been like, yeah, but these pros top 8 every weekend. And I'm like, no, they don't. Pros do. So you see it as, oh, look, there's Sam Black. He's in the top 8 again. He just top 8s all the time. But if you follow one pro, you'll see misses top 8, misses top 8, misses top 8, makes the top 8, right? It's a lot of disappointment when your goal is to make it all the way to the top 8 of the tournament. Thousands of players in the field. It's going to be pretty tough to do so. And I like it when you guys let go a little and show us that emotion.
I also like when we're very happy.
I guess it does mean something good happened, doesn't it? All right, looks like we're working our way towards game number 2 here. Sideboarding finish, shuffling happening right now. Alfredo Torres, boy, he has a lot on his plate here. He's facing down Seth Manfield. That's already hard enough. And he's down a game now as well. But anything can happen. You mentioned it before, as much as the players have tried to configure these black-red decks to get an advantage in the mirror match and then hopefully still have game against the rest of the field, it's pretty tough to get a significant edge. And that is promising here for somebody who needs to win 2 games in a row. Keeping?
Alfredo looks ready.
He almost played his land right away.
Don't know about Seth.
Ooh, Seth looks like he has a real decision here. He's going to ship this one back. Maybe it was one of those close calls, Reed, where you can envision it being okay, but he is on the draw.
Mm-hmm.
And he decided, I'm just going to let this one go and go for another 6-card hand. So Alfredo's going to have to stay patient here before playing that land and getting underway. He doesn't look super patient, does he?
No, I understand.
He's ready to go.
Having the jitters, particularly when you're down a game, you just want to get to playing again. Get even, as it were.
Indeed. All right, let's see if Seth has a 6-card hand he can keep. He does. Going to scry to the bottom, and we are underway in game number 2 of our quarterfinals. Land. Nothing doing yet. Second land for Alfredo Torres, but he just passes the turn back to Seth. Tap land now for Seth Manfield, who passes the turn back to Alfredo. And he's got a Goblin Chain Whirler here on turn number 3 into an empty board. No answer for it from Manfield, so now it's up to Seth to try to break serve. And he's going to do so, get things back to even with cut, but as we've seen so many times with this type of matchup, you pass the turn at even or sometimes even ahead, and by the time it comes back to you, you're behind. And that's technically true here. Hazaret the Fervent hits the battlefield, but with 4 cards left in hand for Alfredo, could be a turn or 2 before it can actually start doing anything.
That's true, but still something Seth has to be very worried about, because there are precious few answers to Hazaret the Fervent in a mirror match. Granted, Seth designed his deck in such a way as to have exile effects like Vraska's Contempt and Doomfall, but he's got to have one because Hazaret doesn't fight fair. She drops your life total very, very rapidly. She can't be beaten in combat. So Alfredo just setting up, and a couple turns from now he's going to let loose.
I think we're going to see him just activate Hazaret here. He's a little flooded with a bunch of lands. Uh-oh, is this Seth missing his land drop?
Yeah, second land drop
Again?
in a row, in fact. So he may be holding Vraska's Contempt, but he would need an untapped black source.
Yeah, and look at this. Torres is just emptying his hand out here, Reed. Double activation of Hazaret to just pitch these last 2 lands, and that's a 9 damage turn there. He's got 1 card left in his hand.
So Seth is dead if he doesn't do something.
Yeah, Pia Nalar offers a small reprieve, but
it's a good start.
Yeah, but he still really needs to find an answer for Hazaret. Here's another activation down to 6, attack you.
But what the Pia means is that now even a Cinder Barons or a Canyon Slew, if Seth is holding the Vraska's Contempt, it may be enough.
Okay. Goblin Chain Whirler, another blocker, but Hazaret is going to be extremely threatening out, effectively forcing a chump block every turn for the rest of the game. Oop, 4 mana. Chandra. That's going to kill the Chain Whirler. And look at this. 2 removal spells in 1 turn is going to knock Seth Manfield down to 1 life. He's got to have, what, Doomfall or Untapped Black Source?
Yeah, Doomfall doesn't even do it because of the Chandra. It has to be Contempt, and then Alfredo has to brick.
Okay, so things looking very good for Alfredo Torres here in game number 2, and he is through to game number 3. Wow.
Boy, now I see,
the Fervent,
now I see why he was so excited to play out that hand.
My goodness. Hazaret kind of took care of things on her own that game. We saw multiple activations of her ability to throw 2 damage.
And that's the thing. Seth Manfield has designed his deck to be very effective in the black-red mirror, but what he gives up is he's not able to play Hazaret, which is my pick for the best card. I think if Alfredo had any other card there, a Rekindling Phoenix, a Glorybringer, it's very likely with that handful of 7 cards, Seth Manfield could have found an answer. He might have been perfectly happy spending 2 Abrades to kill a Rekindling Phoenix, but the fact that it was Hazaret the Fervent really limited the number of cards that could interact, and the inexorable guarantee of 2 damage each turn means that the pressure's on you. You have to win the game, and against an opponent stalled on mana or who for some reason has an awkward draw, that's just impossible.
A couple of updates from our other quarterfinal matches here, Reed. We've got Oliver 2 leading Jose Alvarez 1-0, and Joel Sadowski is ahead of Alex Hahn 1-0. So that's blue-white control up a game and Esper control up a game.
Okay. Now, the relative advantage of the control decks is largest in game 1 because all those cards like Abrade and Magma Spray, they're completely ineffective against the control deck. But once the black-red player gets to sideboard those cards out, bring in stuff like Duress, extra Planeswalkers, extra potent threats, the battlefield evens a little bit. So while that's very good for both of our control players, in some sense it's according to plan, and I wouldn't count the black-red mid-range guys out just yet.
All right, players just finishing up those last sideboard adjustments. Perhaps play-draw based decisions, that kind of thing, little adjustments. But they're now getting shuffled up, and we're going to get a game 3. Alfredo Torres capitalizing on a misstep from Seth Manfield by missing his land drop for 2 turns in a row. The game just ended.
So Seth Manfield, he's happy with the top 8 finish here. He increases his lead in the Player of the Year race, but he's looking for a Roman victory here. He wants to make sure he finishes this weekend and it's not close. That's what will allow him to sleep at night, if he can put some ground between him and the players nipping at his heels. And if he goes out here in this third game against Alfredo Torres, that won't be the case. He really wants 1 or 2 more wins to feel more comfortable. So we confirm that this is Seth Manfield's 15th Grand Prix top 8.
Is this real? He has 5 wins in 15. That's a pretty good conversion rate.
Yeah.
He has 4 top 8s this season, Reed. Does Seth have the keeper this time? Yep, he sure does. Now Alfredo has to make his decision. Seth's going to be on the play, of course, here for game number 3, and they are underway. Soulscar Mage for Alfredo.
Now, in a post-sideboard game, I think it's a bit less likely to see Bomat Courier, that card a little bit of a liability against opposing Goblin Chain Whirlers. But Soulscar Mage, a 2-toughness creature that actually keeps some of its effectiveness as the game goes on, since it can shrink opponents' creatures, help you win key combat steps, combo to kill combo with a burn spell to kill an opposing Hazoret. Missed land drop from Seth. Alfredo, on the other hand, looks to have more lands than he wants or needs. He's going to cycle.
Sorceress Spyglass is the play from Torres.
Okay. So he must have brought that in because Seth has more Planeswalkers than a normal black-red deck, including Karn, Scion of Urza. I'm still skeptical. I don't think I would have brought that card in if I was playing the match. And here it looks like there are no cards to name.
So he's just going to end up naming Chandra or Karn and...
Yeah, guessing, which is really not what you want. The only thing you could think about is there's the Eldest Reborn, so is Seth going to bring back a creature or a Planeswalker with that 6 or 7 turns down the road?
Well, I'll tell you what, he got a lot more likely to do that since Alfredo decided to play the Sorcerer Spyglass this turn rather than a threat. I can understand his thinking. Seth with 2 mana available and no play for the turn, you know, if he just runs out a Goblin Chain Whirler, which Alfredo has in his hand, it could just die. And he could just sort of lose a bit of tempo, or with the Spyglass, it's going to stick.
Well, Alfredo had a creature he could have played and elected the Spyglass instead.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not the way I would have navigated the game.
Right, he has a Chain Whirler, and he could have just been like, here. Now it looks like he gets to play Soulscar Mage and Chain Whirler, or a 4-drop of his choice. He's trying to take a controlling route. I think he's going to play a Doomfall here. Oh, looks like he may be changing his mind. All right, now he's going to play that Chain Whirler. You take a damage. And then I think he drew a Soulscar for the turn, too. Meanwhile, Seth did hit his land drop, though it was tapped, as you can see.
Spyglass, by the way, did name Karn Scion of Urza.
Okay.
I'm not even 100% sure Seth still has that card in his deck. So it looks like Alfredo is passing the turn and Seth is deciding whether or not to use that Chandra's Defeat on Goblin Chain Whirler. The Defeat is a fairly precious card. You want to save that for stuff like Glorybringer and, well, Chandra Torch of Defiance. But Seth being a little bit behind, he doesn't want to let his life total drop, and he might just want to pick his spot to use his mana at the end of the turn. Sure. He does, after all, have Vraska's Contempt for bigger stuff later on.
So Seth fails to hit his 4th land, but at least he had a Goblin Chain Whirler here.
Alfredo would have loved to have Chandra or Glorybringer, but he'll have to settle for cut.
Can Seth find a land?
You know, there's no rush. I really, really like Seth's position here because Alfredo has a fairly reactive hand. He's got the Sorcerer's Spyglass that's not immediately helping him. And Seth, despite not having a lot of lands, did have plenty of cheap removal. So this is a pretty enviable position because eventually, sooner or later, he's going to draw out of this this Mana Screw, and once he does, he's going to unlock so many powerful spells in his hand that, I mean, his life total's still 19, and Alfredo's down to 3 cards in hand. I think Alfredo's going to need to have some good draws off the top, or else he's going to give Seth Manfield too much time, and Seth, with the stocked hand, will just outmuscle him.
Seth really looking to protect his life total at all costs here. Use Magma Spray to take down Soul Scar Mage. And we're really looking for a haymaker here from Torres. And Doomfall isn't it.
Nope. He's just going to take an expensive card that Seth hasn't yet had to invest mana in. He'll probably take the Chandra. I mean, maybe not because he has the defeat. Okay, this makes sense. Eldest Reborn.
Still pretty awkward to have a Sorcerous Spyglass on the table and your opponent has a Chandra, but you didn't name that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a land?
If you read a lot of content from Luis Scott Vargas, he has basically this crusade of trying to get people to not board in cards like Surgical Extraction, Memoricide, stuff like that. And his point being effectively, you don't want to guess and you don't want to answer a card that your opponent hasn't drawn yet, because that almost by definition is going to put you at a disadvantage. Sometimes it works out, but it's just not a reliable strategy.
Not familiar with his work, but I'll take your word for it. Here's a Scrap Heap Scrounger for Alfredo Torres. And by the way, Reed, Chandra's defeat was used to kill a Goblin Chain Whirler there. So Chandra herself could be very good if he doesn't have a backup plan for that. Interestingly, Manfield says, you know what, I'm just going to say land go here because he does have in his hand this card, Vraska's Contempt, that can take care of the only threat on the battlefield right now. Seth seems pretty content to just go 1-for-1 for now that he's drawn that 4th land. And here's a Rekindling Phoenix. Land go, and now all of a sudden Alfredo has drawn too many lands. Seth with just the right amount, and here comes the attack from the Phoenix. This one may have slipped away from Torres.
Yeah, sort of the classic Mana Screw versus Mana Flood dynamic, where the player who's missing land drops, yeah, they're at a really bad disadvantage in the early turns, but if it's not a bad enough disadvantage, if the opponent isn't able to win the game or get an irreversible advantage, then eventually you're going to find your lands and you're going to unlock those 6 or 7 spells that you have waiting. And traditionally, it's the player who draws out of the Mana Screw that has a great position.
Piana Larsa play for Torres, who passes the turn back to Manfield. Seth being very patient with that copy of Chandra Torch of Defiance. Well, we have a second here. Sadowski and Han are now tied at 1 game apiece. And Stempo versus Sigris just finally ended game 1 with Stempo up a game.
Looks like all 4 of our quarterfinals matches are getting down to it. Players fighting tooth and nail.
Doomfall target you. That's going to get the last card, relevant card out of Alfredo Torres' hand, that Chandra's defeat that he was saving for the Chandra in hand. Leaves him with just a mountain. That means the way is clear now for Seth Manfield. He knows that his opponent is just stone top decking.
Huge draw step here, Marshall.
We knew about that mountain. Does he have a spell? Sort of. It was Kerry Zev, not quite what he wanted, right?
Yeah, that was a really important window for him to be able to kill off the Rekindling Phoenix. If he could have done that, he would have answered Seth's most important threat. He would have made the Doomfall a 1-for-0 card exchange. But top of his library did not deliver at the right time. It's just another creature. Now Seth with the Rekindling Phoenix. Reborn. Back to square one. And Seth Manfield still with a couple cards in hand and a deck that's stronger in the late game.
Alfredo did get an attack in, though, with PNLR and the Thopter. He also used the remaining mana to pump up the Thopter. So Seth's down to 16, but Alfredo's going to need a pretty insane string of top decks to get out of this. But we've seen it. Power level of the cards out of this red-black deck is very high. Cards like Glorybringer can swing games. We saw it at the Pro Tour.
Yeah, I think the best route to victory is if Torres can navigate to a spot where Seth feels pressure to use his Vraska's Contempt, and then he draws Hazoret. Because we saw in Game 2 Hazoret just dodging so many of the removal spells, crashing through opposing blockers. But I think Seth's going to be really careful with the Vraska's Contempt that's in his hand. He did have 2, right?
Not sure.
Maybe he just had 1 and a Doomfall. I can't exactly recall, but Seth anyway is going to be thinking about Hazoret and trying, if he can, to be prepared for it ahead of time.
He did have another one.
Okay, but he's spending it, so
yep.
This might open the door.
Ooh, he's really taking a pause here. He's worried about PNLR. I think one of the things that might be going through his mind is if you look in the graveyard there for Alfredo, you do see a cut to ribbon sitting in the yard. And while Seth's at a pretty healthy 16, you know, something bad happens to the Rekindling Phoenix, the Thopter gets in for 3 or 4, and next thing you know, he's got problems.
Sure, and let's not forget there's a Sorcerer's Spyglass that is, at least at this stage in the game, somewhat expendable. So Torres could have sacrificed that to make the Phoenix unable to block and then killed the Chandra. And I think Seth, he's willing to chance a Hazoret off the top in favor of keeping Chandra in play now because that's what his big advantage is on this board state. And it's, you know, still Seth's advantage here, but it's this game is now close enough that a string of good top decks could get Alfredo back in.
Well, let's see if Seth can do that himself because he's the one that has the card advantage gained from Chandra. And look at that right away. A Braid is going to kill Kerry Zev and reduce Alfredo Torres to simply a Thopter token on his side of the battlefield. And boy, if you just take a snapshot of the battlefields here, Reed, pretty ugly from Alfredo's perspective. Facing down a Rekindling Phoenix and Chandra. You got to feel like he's got to get something right now. Attack Chandra with my Thopter. Go. Seth draws his card for the turn. Plus his Chandra. Let's see what he hits this time. This time it's just a land, so 2 damage. Down to 8 for Torres. Down to 4. Yeah, and he passes the turn back. Probably the last draw step here for Alfredo.
Good one.
Okay.
Get rid of that Phoenix.
Doomfall exiles the Phoenix. He's going to continue to pressure Chandra, but minimally, it's still 2 turns away from Manfield. It did give him an out, though, and there's another brick there. Down to 2. Ooh, but there's PNLR. Is there anything for Torres at this point? Even if he kills Chandra, he's dead, and that's going to do it. Seth Manfield advances to the semifinals, looking to extend his Player of the Year race. That's kind of his goal at this point. I mean, there's not a whole lot left for him this season. But that is certainly a worthy goal indeed, and he's going to be doing so, advancing to the semis.
We have one other update. Another one of our big-name players actually eliminated Oliver 2 falls to Jose Alvarez. So despite winning Game 1 with his blue-white control deck, he's taken down in the sideboard games by the menace of the format Black-Red.
So Oliver 2 is going to have to settle for yet another GP top 8 this season, of which he's had many. but it will end there. So that means that we've got game 2 between Mike Sigrist and Joe Stempo, with Stempo winning a prolonged game 1. And it looks like they're in the middle part of game 2 here, though, so they're cruising.
I don't know if this is the middle. This is, how do they only get to turn 5 by now with only one spell played for each player?
Champion at Wits and Doomfall. Well, it just started.
This might be the middle of a game between Seth Manfield and Alfredo Torres, but between Mike Sigrist and Joe Stempo, when we can expect it to go 25 turns, we're still in the very beginning parts.
All right. This is the Soulscar Mage part of our matchup here.
So this looks like committing a spell on the stack. I think Mike probably just really wanted to use his mana there. Or get an instant in the graveyard if he has Torrential Gearhulk.
Does have 6 mana now, and he does have a Gearhulk. But Stempo's having none of it. He's just going to pass a turn back to Mike.
All right, well, I have a theory about what happened. Maybe Mike Sigrist had to mulligan one or more times, because that would explain why they took kind of a long time to get moving. And it would explain this sequence from Mike where he is really, really trying to set up an early game Torrential Gearhulk memory.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a way to undo an early advantage from mulligans.
Okay. Because Mike's only got 2 cards left in his hand or whatever, and Joe could have 5 or 6.
Precisely.
Okay.
Just a theory, but it could be what's going on here.
By the way, while the players shuffle in, I have a story for you, Reed. I was out taking some photos of the GP, and somebody resolved a memory, and they picked up all their permanents in all their graveyard and started just shuffling away.
No, buddy, that's Scheherazade. Actually, not even, but
yeah.
I don't think there's any card that does that.
I don't think so either.
Karn Ultimate, Karn Silver Golem
Ultimate. Yeah, maybe there's some, 5 red card or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a mess to unwind, but I think they did actually figure it out. All right, so we're kind of back to square one here with 7 cards going into hand for both players, and both players sitting on 6 lands apiece. We saw that Joe Stempo, before Memory Resolve, did use his Vraska's Contempt to make sure that the Gearhulk wasn't left over after all of this. But
Mike Sigrist with a small but distinct advantage here, as he gets the first draw step and he gets the first ability to untap with all of his mana. Joe Stempo can hope that he drew into, a 2-mana counterspell, so he can keep pace in terms of tempo and untap and get a fresh start.
But Censor is going to counter the negate, meaning that Mike gets a good, clean look at what's going on in Joe's hand.
Ooh,
and let's see what he's got.
There's some goodies there.
Yeah, wow. You can see the Torrential Gearhulk, the Scarab God, commits to memory.
Joe Stempo might say, "Hey, you're gonna Gearhulk memory me. I'm gonna Gearhulk memory you." Who knows? But this is actually turn 30 of the game, and this has just happened a number of times already.
No kidding. Yeah, our graphic might be wrong. It could still be game 1. Vizier of Many Faces is the last spell in hand for Stempo. He's got. I got to say, Mike has some really nice targets for this Doomfall. That is a pretty loaded hand there from Joe.
Yeah, so it depends on the context of Mike's hand. If he has got a good, clean answer for that Scarab God, I would be inclined to take Torrential Gearhulk or maybe Vizier of Many Faces. But, the Scarab God is the most devastating card when it goes unanswered, so and Mike doesn't want to play with fire too much if he doesn't have an answer already lined up for it.
He must have something he really wants to resolve, because he took Commit with Doomfall and then went Land, Glint Sleeve, Siphoner.
Yeah, fascinating turn of events.
Another update from one of our matches, Alex Hahn has defeated Joe Sadowski.
Wow, so both of our control players, after winning game 1, they fall to black-red. We're going to have 3 black-red decks in our top 4.
Yeah, we're going to have 3 black-reds and 1 blue-black. That's the recipe today, so we'll see which one of these 2 blue-black decks ends up securing their spot in the semifinal. But, yeah, you said it, Reed. Triple black-red. And I got to say, if I'm Seth Manfield, I think I'm feeling pretty good about that. Again, his deck does seem to be pretty well suited for the black-red heavy metagame. Stempo's just going to go ahead and copy the glint sleeve siphoner with that Vizier of Many Faces. He wants one of his own.
For all the super powerful cards that he had access to, that's a fairly unassuming play. Just copying a 2-drop, and indeed Mike Sigrist getting the first untap with the siphoner is quite a big advantage. But I did see that Joe picked up a pretty special card for his draw step, Essence Scatter, which is going to be more effective given that Mike just saw his hand and didn't see it, so he might think the coast is clear.
Yeah, Mike has his own copy of the Scarab God in there. He's certainly interested. But it could be pretty bad for Mike if he goes for the Scarab God, gets it countered, and then Joe gets to untap and play one of those big bombs in his hand. Mike's so patient. He's going to go for a Champion of Wits and leave up Commit as well. Joe's thinking, asks him, how many cards do you have in your hand? And it actually does fire off the Essence Scatter right now on Champion of Wits. I think Mike's fine with that, right?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised.
Because look at this. The Scarab God resolves thanks to a land. That worked out beautifully for Mike, baiting out that counterspell. And then following up with one of the most powerful cards in the matchup. Though, is that Hostage Taker from Joe?
Wow, did he just pick up Hostage Taker?
I think he did.
So what does that mean exactly? What will he do?
Well, he doesn't have enough mana to steal the Scarab God and cast it.
This is kind of a disaster because, well, I guess either way, as soon as Champion of the Wits was put on the stack, it guaranteed that there were going to be creatures in the graveyard for the purposes of the Scarab God. But that's a particularly devastating one to have Mike Sigrist animate with the Scarab God's 4-mana activation, because he'll draw 4 cards, and that will be an irreversible advantage even if Joe is able to pick up a removal spell for the Scarab God later on. So I think priority number 1 is Joe cannot let Mike untap with the Scarab God. He has to Hostage Taker it and just hope Mike has a bunch of bricks in hand. That's the only way I see him staying in this game.
Yeah, super desperate times here for Joe Stempo. The good news is he is up a game. Okay, here comes Hostage Taker. This can go horribly wrong for Joe if Mike has some way to interact with it on his turn.
Okay, looks like he wants to reset his Vizier of Many Faces.
And then get his own Scarab God.
Or copy Hostage Taker again. Does that do anything? Not really. I guess he's just going to get his own Scarab God. I don't really like being the second one with the Scarab God, though.
Right. You get in that game of chicken, but Mike Sigrist gets to untap. And that means he has his mana available and will probably leave no targets for Joe Stempo.
Yeah, I mean, just as a baseline play, Mike Sigrist can activate Scarab God on Champion of Wits, discard the best creature in his hand, and animate that as well.
And just be miles ahead on board with no targets in the graveyard for Joe.
On board and cards in hand.
Right, yeah, both. So this is going to be draw 4, discard 2.
See, I could envision discarding the other Champion of Wits, but maybe Mike Sigrist has a different idea for what to spend that 4 mana on.
That was all during his upkeep.
Ooh, Walking Ballista.
Then he draws an additional card from Glint Sleeve Siphoner and his draw step. So before we even got to his main phase, Mike had drawn 6 cards and discarded 2 of them, including a scry and a little chip at Joe Stempo's life total. You can see how far behind he is.
So if Mike winds up casting the Champion of Wits from his hand, he left a little bit of value on the table, but what it does mean is that he'll have 2 mana open for whatever pleases him most, potentially holding up Essence Scatter.
Mike just discarding 2 swamps here. Plays an Ether Hub for the turn. And passes the turn back to Joe Stempo. Finds himself in quite a predicament versus Sigrist here.
Yeah, and Joe just with all these reactive cards, a Jace's Defeat, a Gearhulk that can only flashback counterspells, and yet it's the battlefield that he has to contend with more than Mike's hand. I think he's just stuck. I don't really see much he can do to further his game plan or stymie Mike's game plan.
He's looking, he's trying to find some way out. But at the end of the day, he just drew his card and passed the turn.
Yeah, well, while his decisions with the hostage taker made sense and used his mana effectively, I still kind of feel like as soon as you pass the turn to let Mike untap with the Scarab God, it's sort of over. And I think as unlikely as it might be, he should have just hostage takered the Scarab God and crossed his fingers that there was no answer.
Sigrist is now going to play Argwell's Bloodfast.
Not hugely relevant. Mike already has a stacked hand. He already has plenty of nice things he can spend his mana on. And if Mike counters this, then has access to getting back the Gearhulk at instant speed with the Scarab God, that is usually the KO move.
Yeah, that's the lock.
But Joe Stempo with the Jace's Defeat,
yep.
he wins the battle. Okay, so Argyle's Bloodfast and Torrential Gearhulk are still on the stack. Mike said, your Jace's Defeat resolves countering my Essence Scatter. Mm-hmm. Now I'll take further action, see if I can draw into something.
So Gearhulk's going to resolve. Its trigger goes on the stack, gives Negate flashback. He's going to cast Negate targeting the Bloodfast, and we're done with that turn. So Joe Stempo wins that. Again, another little battle win for him there. He still has to face down the Scarab God, even though he has one of his own.
No creatures in the graveyard, and as soon as a creature hits the graveyard, that's when the action's going to begin. And you only want to make sure a creature is dying when you have more mana and when you can get the Scarab God to actually resolve on it.
In the meantime, Mike's going to get this kind of passive advantage from the Scry and the damage and stuff from the Scarab God's upkeep trigger.
Actually, to go back to a turn ago, when Mike he cast a Champion of Wits from his hand when an alternative play was to discard it to the first Champion of Wits and reanimate it.
Mm-hmm.
Another really nice thing about taking that play is it would keep the champion safe. It would be effectively exiled for good, whereas I could envision one route for Joe Stempo to get back into this game of killing Mike's existing Champion of Wits and animating it with the Scarab God to refill his hand, get some more action. And I think if you can, you want to turn off that avenue to victory.
Yeah, just shut that door.
Here we have Joe attacking with his Vizier of Many Faces, which, if you'll recall, is copying the Scarab God, which is fascinating play because we just talked about the first creature hitting the battlefield triggering a chain of events. Joe has more mana, but the problem is that's his Scarab God that's in combat. So if that thing dies, he can't animate anything.
Right.
So we'll see what Mike Sigrist decides to do with this.
Mike seems to like the idea of throwing a double block here. The 4/4 Champion of Wits and the 2/1. Says these are pretty expendable.
And if the Vizier dies, there will be a trigger for it to go back to Joe Stempo's hand at the end of the turn. But Mike can just reanimate it before that. Copy something of his choice. Oof.
Oh, boy. Joe Stempo's putting it in the graveyard. And Sigrist kind of gives a little point there, like.
Okay, so one of Mike's champions goes to the graveyard. The other gets exiled. They did that correctly. And now we're in the end of combat step, and what's Mike going to do?
He's going to start tapping mana. Grab himself a Vizier.
Vizier copies Torrential Gearhulk. Now, I actually had this sequence come up at the World Championships when I played against Jerry Thompson. He was playing blue-black control, and I had Vizier of Many Faces in my deck.
Uh-huh.
He Scarab Gods my Vizier, copies Torrential Gearhulk. I say, is that a 4/4 or a 5/6? He goes, I don't know. And we stumped two of the red shirt head judges before we finally got an answer. I think the answer was that it's a 5/6.
Really?
But okay, actually it looks like Mike chooses a different line. He takes Hostage Taker.
Yeah.
He copies Hostage Taker and takes the Gearhulk.
Yeah, he's on the why not both line.
Well, it could go badly if Joe had Vraska's Contempt or something like that, but oh wow, here's...
And look at this, an opening for Joe Stempo.
Okay, so it kind of looked like this was going badly for Joe, and in many ways it may have gone badly for him.
They're trying to figure out.
But he was losing badly on the board, and he needed some kind of fireworks to happen, and he got fireworks here. So he's going to refill his hand, get a change on the battlefield. Mike has some things going on that are a little bit fragile there if the Vizier winds up dying. So I like Joe's position a little bit more. I still think he's very far behind in the game, but I can more easily see a turn of events where he winds up winning from this position than I could a turn ago. So I don't really mind this sequence of events if I'm Joe Stempo.
And Joe's on deck here to get back a Champion of Wits. Now it's a 4/4.
Curious what the players are asking about.
Yeah, I'm curious too. Oh, they were asking if it's a zombie or not.
Well, these games are always just crazy when both players have the Scarab God.
That's what I was just going to say. This is just absurd. It was already kind of a crazy game when we came in because there wasn't a whole lot going on, but we got to see Mike Sigrist cast Memory and just sort of reset everything, but with both players on 6 lands, and it has gotten progressively crazier from then.
Boy, these things are just marathons.
And yeah, by the way, that Vizier is not a zombie. So, no scry there. Is Mike going to attack with that thing? Yeah, he sure is.
Okay, so I guess Mike is just putting that up as sacrificial fodder because he's happy if any creature goes to the graveyard. But in the meantime, he gets a pretty reasonable advantage by chipping in for 2, getting another energy.
Yeah, that'll be a card next turn. But Joe Stempo, he is tapped out. So if Mike can get a creature in the graveyard here, he can reanimate it using the Scarab God and further bolster his position, though it turns out his entire turn is attack with Glint Sleeve Siphoner go.
So Joe now gets to use the 2 cards that he drew into last turn. He gets a Scry and another draw step. Let's see if these 3 that he's found can change the board state for the better. 2 mana. Cycle.
Okay. Joe's just going to pass the turn back to Mike again.
Wow. And boy, I sort of feel silly. A turn or 2 ago, Mike Sigrist tried to cast Argel's Bloodfast.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, this card isn't that big of a deal. But Joe Stempo wound up countering it, and it would be a big deal if it was on the battlefield because we actually have settled into a little bit of a slower holding pattern. I thought we were going to see fireworks every turn, but Mike could actually use a little bit of ability to refill his hand.
Kind of interesting here, Mike Sigrist is casting Torrential Gearhulk off of that copied Hostage Taker, but Joe is going to respond.
Gets rid of Mike's Scarab God.
Yeah. Exiled it good and proper. Mike has a replacement Scarab God in his hand.
Did Mike just not cast anything off of the Gearhulk?
Looks like it. Draws an extra card thanks to Glint Sleeve Siphoner and that attack last turn. Like I said, Mike does have another Scarab God in his hand.
Mike drew the card that he wished he could have cast off of Torrential Gearhulk, which is Vraska's Contempt. But better late than never. That's still a very, very effective card here.
He's going to exile the Scarab God from Joe Stempo. And Mike can breathe a sigh of relief there because getting that thing off the battlefield opens up a whole new world, especially given that he can cast his own copy of it this turn if he'd like.
In comes... I don't remember what that thing was, but I do remember that it's not a zombie.
It's a hostage taker.
Okay.
A non-zombie hostage taker.
Your Comparions have been posted at the Black Gathering Point. Players in the 6 o'clock standard left. Your Comparions have been posted at the
Cycling.
Black Gathering Point.
Another Scarab God in hand now for Joe. I wonder what the most important card in the matchup is. These decks are in many ways built around the Scarab God, or at least trying to leverage its power. And Mike, though, has another copy of Vraska's Contempt, and he gets to do this.
Those were his 2 draws for the
Before.
turn, his draw step and his Glint Sleeve Siphoner draw.
We're both Contempt?
Seems that way.
Boy. And with nothing in the graveyard, he gets away with it, right? I mean, that's the key here, is that Joe doesn't even get to get value from his Scarab God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now Mike has the Scarab God again. Incidentally, Mike also has a Torrential Gearhulk and few other good threats. This one has been very much more jabs back and forth rather than the haymakers that we saw in the red-black matches, where it's like you get a little behind or you stumble and then all of a sudden you just get an avalanche of damage.
I think what it is the blue-black deck just has a better ability to come from behind and to answer the haymakers because, I mean, certainly Scarab God and Torrential Gearhulk, these are haymaker cards that should be dramatically changing the context of the game, but the blue-black mid-range decks, they're just on such even footing that it almost seems like nothing is irreversible. Something devastating comes in, it can be met by a Vraska's Contempt. It can get Hostage Taker. The opponent can keep pace with the Scarab God. And if all that fails, somebody can just memory and set everything back. Probably Joe Stempo will draw Upheaval for his next turn. We'll be in a whole new game state.
Float a bunch of mana.
Players correcting life totals there.
Stempo says draw go. Fetid Pools is going to get cycled by Sigrist.
Standard players in the
Boy, it's worth noting, too, Mike Sigrist's match right before the top 8, round 15 of the Swiss, was also a blue-black control mirror, finished on turn 5 of extra turns with a time extension. So, I mean, I feel for Sigrist here. His endurance is remarkable, and I wonder if exhaustion could be starting to take a toll, particularly since we're on track for going to Game 3. Not to mention, if he wins that, he's got another opponent waiting for him. This is a big deal. I mean,
right.
I've played matches like this, and it's not trivial. You feel differently when you finish the match than you did when you started. And I mean, Mike's a professional. He's a strong guy, but at a certain point, you know, something's got to give.
And like you said, whoever does win this match is going to have a player seated, shuffling, and waiting to say, "Take your seat, my friend." How do you feel about black-red?
players in the 5 p.m. modern event. Your next round pairings are currently being posted.
Yet another Scarab God met by yet another Vraska's Contempt.
Players in 5 p.m. modern.
This time, Sigrist is going to have an action.
Being posted.
Still, each of these interactions has seen Mike Sigrist pull further and further ahead on board. Mainly, the Gearhulk has been the thing that's able to actually impact it. But now he's got double Siphoner, still has the 2/3 Hostage Taker that's copied, and a Champion of Wits to join that Gearhulk. Joe hasn't really done much in the past few turns, just drawing cards and saying, "Yeah, your move."
Magic players in 430 sealed. Your round 2 pairings have been posted online and are going up on the boards. Again, players in 430 sealed. Your round 2 pairings are going up. Please find your seats.
Sigrist identifies they're at a stage in the game where it's going to be hard to nab something with the mana leak mode of Supreme Will, so he just cashes it in. Look at his top 4. One card that Mike's been holding on to pretty tightly here is Walking Ballista, really picking his spot. We know that card was boarded in primarily as an answer to Glint Sleeve Siphoner, but in a super long game like this, it could come up that it just has a much, much bigger effect than that.
And now we see a huge attack here from Sigrist. Joe Stempo just trying to do anything he can. Okay, damage.
So we're at the point in the game where Joe Stempo is making moves to protect his life total, which means when he has to transition away from fighting the card advantage board state battles to just trying to survive, he's in a bad shape, and it looks like he is not even able to survive that turn. He's packing him up.
So we're tied at 1 game apiece here in our last quarterfinal match to give you an update on what's happened in the other ones, if you're just coming back. Jose Alvarez with Black-Red Aggro defeated Oliver 2 to secure his seat. And he will be playing against the winner of this next game. On the other side of the bracket, though, Black-Red Aggro in the hands of Alex Hahn defeats Joel Sadowski with his Esper control deck. So there's Black-Red on the other side of the bracket, too. And the last one was Black-Red Aggro versus Black-Red Mid-Range. Seth Manfield wins that one over Alfredo Torres. So we've got black-red, 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 and then a blue-black, depending on who wins this one. It will be blue-black either way, though.
So in other words, Seth Manfield has the same matchup waiting for him in the semifinals that he played in the quarters. He's got to feel at least okay about that. He's been playing against black-red all weekend, and his deck has, we believe, a slight advantage. And meanwhile, it is Jose Alvarez waiting for the winner of Mike Sigrist and Joe Stempo. Red-black versus blue-black mid-range, sort of a defining matchup of Standard. That was, in fact, the finals of our last Grand Prix in LA. There it was red-black taking the trophy, and I think that popular opinion would be red-black is a very, very small favorite in the matchup. Blue-black has a lot of great tools. It can certainly hang, and a player of the caliber of Mike Sigrist or what Joe Stempo has proven himself to be this weekend, they could win, but I wouldn't count them as favorites necessarily in the matchup.
Well, buckle in. We could have a long game 3 here between these two. Each of their games has been very long here in the quarters. Extremely grindy matchup, and like you said, kind of characterized by the ability to come back. There's very swingy cards, but they tend to be better when you're a little behind, like Vizier and Hostage Taker are the kind of cards that you spring after you've fallen behind.
Very true.
Mike Sigrist versus Joe Stempo.
Mike Sigrist, also a player who's shown wide range of capabilities in terms of standard decks over the season. He had a top 8 at Grand Prix Pittsburgh with blue-white control, where ironically he posted an article after the tournament about how miserable it was to play such a slow deck where you're getting draws and you never got time between rounds. And now here he is with blue-black mid-range suffering the same fate. But he's also very well versed in red-black, other mid-range decks. So Mike, a player with a wide range.
Looks like Joe may have changed his mind now.
Yeah, so the players and the judges are going to be a little bit less worried about a long time sideboarding since this is an untimed match. I think clearly Joe is not doing anything malicious, but still, the rules say you have a certain amount of time to sideboard. You can't grossly exceed that.
I really appreciate, by the way, that Joe's shoes match his sleeves.
He seems to be going out of his way to show that to the camera as well.
So a few more minutes here, and we will be underway in our last quarterfinal match. Mike Sigrist versus Joe Stempo. We've got our semifinals all planned out. Black-red on the menu.
We'll be seeing a lot of that.
A lot of mid-range, kind of grindy matchups here. We're not going to be seeing any quick combos or super fast aggro decks or super slow control decks. These are going to be very much resource management contests between the decks for the rest of the day. So if that's your thing, you're in the right place. If you wanted to run off and get a sandwich real quick, probably not the worst time to do it. We're just going to be getting our mana set up here in game number 3.
Yeah, the best thing that can really happen for one of these players early on is a Glint Sleeve Siphoner, or failing that, a Argyll's Bloodfast. Some kind of permanent that can give a long-run advantage. Mm-hmm. We'll see if Mike is prepared with either Fatal Push or Walking Ballista, something to answer this. No Fatal Push, at least. Aha!
Ooh! How about 2 different permanents that give long-term advantage? One more fragile than the other.
We'll see which one comes out on top. I kind of like the Siphoner side because that provides an advantage without having to spend your mana, and life total is not irrelevant. So if you're chipping away at your own life by activating the Bloodfast, and your opponent's hitting you with a Glint Sleeve Siphoner, you can drop pretty quickly. So Mike, I think, would love to be able to cast a spell from his hand this turn, and Doomfall, that's passable. At least it will permanently exile Champion of Wits. Let's definitely make sure to get that one exiled. That's important.
Right, it went into the graveyard, but that's not where it belongs. There we go, Joe. Major difference in this type of matchup. Joe says, I took the energy away. Did I draw my card from it yet? I guess they decided no, not yet. Land number 4 here for Stempo. Mike's tapped out.
That might be a little bit of the exhaustion showing, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Ooh, double trouble now. 2 Glint Sleeve Siphoners. Boy, this one could get out of hand. And like you said, Sigris doesn't really have a great opportunity to start activating the Bloodfast until he cleans up this board. Blocking, not a great option against the Menace creatures. He may just need to go 1-for-1 removal, 1-for-1 removal against Joe here.
Walking Ballista would be the best card to pick up.
Ooh.
I saw that he headboarded that in. He has got 2 in his sideboard, but he does not have 1 in his hand right now.
Sigris has decided ultimately just to say go here. He does have Vraska's Contempt in his hand. But 2 Glint Sleeve Siphoners is a potent combo. That's 2 cards, per turn. Until one of them goes away. This is kind of the moment of truth here for Sigris. He's like, I got to use it now or you're going to get a free energy off of this thing, and that equals a card next turn. So he does pull a trigger here, though, on Vraska's Contempt. That gets rid of permanently the Siphoner, but still leaves one behind. And look at this. All tapped out, and Joe's Tempo doesn't have anything to do.
Yeah, he's filled up his hand. He's attacked Mike's life total, but his plays are mostly reactive here. I see an Essence Scatter shuffled to the front.
I mean, 5 mana, opponent tapped out. You know what I'm thinking.
Scarab God.
Yeah, no targets for it, though, at the moment, so I don't know if it would even be such an amazing play, but getting it resolved, it's got to be a good start. Once again, Sigris, land go. He does have another copy of Vraska's Contempt. Boy, he has seen a ton of those in these 2 games that we've watched, and he's needed every one of them. This time, though, Sigris is just going to go ahead and take the hit. And he's going to go for end-step Vraska's Contempt to try to clean up the board, maintain his life total, and now start using Argyll's Bloodfast.
So Siggy now with a distinct advantage.
Yes. He found the removal spells he needed to keep the board clear, and now he's going to go for Champion of Wits.
Joe picked up 2 additional cards off of those Siphoners, but now when the dust is settled, it's Mike Sigris with the Argyll's Bloodfast and a reasonable life total, so he'll probably be able to leverage that if the game goes long, and he has a nice mix of answers for Joe's threats.
Champion Wits on the battlefield. Mike resolving the trigger now.
Love it. I love discarding one champion to the other because that card is not really in there for the casting value. It's more for the, let me look down on turn 17 and find a juicy 7-mana play in my graveyard.
Sigris has left up mana for some type of counterspell or this, activating the Bloodfast. And there's your friend, Reed, the the Walking Ballista he wanted a little sooner earlier, but still might come in handy later.
Yeah, he had to do things the hard way since the Ballista didn't show up early enough, but he did accomplish them.
Yeah, I'm curious, though, is there a chance that comes back to bite him, that he had to use those Vraska's Contempts on the Siphoners when we start getting down into Gearhulk and Scarab God?
It means he's going to have to be more careful. It means he's going to have to rely a little bit more on counter spells to answer those Torrential Gearhulks and Scarab Gods. And it also means if he is backed into a corner where he has to, say, Gearhulk of Vraska's Contempt, he'll have to be very, very careful to pick a spot where it's not going to get countered.
Okay. Because these games do go long, and while he'll breathe a sigh of relief to get those Siphoners off the battlefield, it did take 2 of his best removal spells to do so, even a Doomfall in there as well.
Wow, is Mike still missing a land drop from his hand after all of that?
What?
That's a big deal.
I think you're right. Wow. He drew 2 cards there. He's going to just cast another Champion of Wits, hoping to find some lands here. Joe may be sensing a little weakness here, is going to go for Essence Scatter.
If I'm Joe, I'm thinking about picking a spot to resolve my Torrential Gearhulk. So I could see letting that resolve and then trying to pounce if Mike end of turn activates the Bloodfast.
Mm-hmm.
But Joe just wants to use his Essence Scatter when he has a good opportunity for it.
Now you think that Joe just wants to get the Gearhulk onto the battlefield full stop?
Well, it's a question, right? Because doing nothing does not favor Joe. It's going to allow Mike to continue drawing extra cards, find his land drops, and then once Mike is actually ready to start taking some actions, he'll have a huge advantage based on that stacked hand. So if I'm Joe, I'm thinking about what can I possibly do to force the action, maybe chip away at those 10 points of remaining life and turn off the Bloodfast. So I would be looking for an opportunity to get the Gearhulk into play, but not necessarily at no value since there are plenty of answers.
Okay. Well, he did go for it. Mike Sigrist had the Essence Scatter there. There's a land for Mike.
Mike can just play full control here. He can just pass with his mana open every turn, draw some extra cards, and make sure nothing bad happens, because if nothing bad happens, he's going to win.
How low can he go with his life total? Is there any?
He can go to 2 and then recoup with the Temple of Aklazats and the Vraska's Contempts.
Okay.
I guess he could be worried about walking Ballista, but actually that one does not appear in Joe Stempo's lists, and I think the players know that.
Boy, this hand is starting to look pretty good for Sigrist. Yeah, he was missing land drops earlier, perhaps a bit annoying, but that means that he had a lot of spells in his hand, and now he's hitting his lands.
Mm-hmm. That same dynamic that we talked about in Seth Manfield versus Alfredo Torres, which is the player who draws out of the mana screw early on, has a big advantage in the long game. Yeah,
you know, the tail of the tape here for this one was Joe out to that quick lead with a pair of Glint Sleeve Siphoners, and he was able to draw some extra cards off of it. The thing that happened, though, was that they ended up being a bunch of counter spells and reaction spells that he couldn't press his advantage. And Mike, while it ended up being a little clunky to have to use a pair of Vraska's Contempts to kill those Siphoners, they resolved, and now he's really starting to ride the wave from the Bloodfast.
Yeah, Joe was almost able to get across the finish line. Mike was just barely able to stabilize. If anything had been different, say if one of those Essence Scatters in Joe's hand had been a negate to counter Vraska's Contempt, then he might have been able to just get far enough ahead that it was too late. As it was, you pointed out that one turn where he had 5 mana and a green light to cast anything. He didn't have anything, wasn't able to continue pushing his advantage, and now Mike is well back into the game. In fact, I think we're getting to a position where it's basically Mike's game to lose. If he navigates carefully and doesn't leave any openings, I think he's got it, but there are, believe me, plenty of opportunities to make a mistake, tap out at the wrong time, leave yourself vulnerable.
And while Mike is, like you said, both of these players are going to be probably facing down a bit of fatigue, especially given that we did have a 3-day weekend here. Mike, I would describe his style as careful. He does try to think through everything. He's not the one that just says, well, I hope this works and puts it on the stack. He's really going to, take his time with it. Here's Never from Joe Stempo. Just going to take out the walking ballista, but Mike's probably like, sure.
Yeah.
Joe worried about the ballista in the long run. Boy, this sure is a grindy matchup as well. We saw the card advantage engines coming into play early for Joe Stempo with the 2 siphoners, but now Mike Sigrist and the Bloodfast has really taken over. All this advantage in his hand. Most of it thanks to the Bloodfast. He's even going to get another card dropping down to 4. All right, we're going to transform into Temple of Aklazats now, which can get Mike some of that life back.
Also relevantly, just the extra land when he has so many sweet cards in his hand. And don't forget those Champion of Wits in the graveyard, too. He has a lot of very nice things he could spend his mana on given the time. But he's just being super, super careful. Doesn't want to let Joe slip through a Torrential Gearhulk or a Scarab God at the wrong time.
Mike looks like he's considering the Scarab God. Oh, there's a Field of Ruin over there as well. Okay. He taps the Temple. Essence Scatter, though, for Joe Stempo, says no to the Scarab God.
So that may look like a good exchange for Joe, and in a way it is, but Mike Sigrist at this point is happy with any exchange. He's got so much more cardboard than Joe Stempo. He's got such a resource advantage that just paring down, making sure nothing bad can happen, that's exactly what he wants to do. If he can spend any amount of mana and safely trade for one card out of Joe Stempo's hand, he's going to do it.
And you saw Mike Sigrist. I mentioned that briefly that Joe had the Field of Ruin. Mike actually tapped his Temple, anticipating that Joe was going to do just this and didn't want to get...
It's a really tight play by Mike. That's almost like a legacy play.
Yeah.
Tapping your dual land so you don't get wasted.
Mm-hmm. And Joe did exactly that. So Mike with plenty of mana up after he attacked in with the Glint Sleeve Siphoner.
3:30 p.m. Two-headed giant. Your third and final round appearance.
Interestingly, though, Mike is down to 4 now. And he's not going to be able to gain a bunch of life thanks to that Siphoner. Or, excuse me, that Temple of Aklazats. And that might limit him a little bit with this Siphoner. We're going to see return now from Joe. He's going to exile a card from Mike's graveyard, and he'll get a 2/2 zombie as well.
He hit, was it Essence Scatter?
Yeah.
So
this is a
he doesn't
nod
care,
to Scarab Gods of the future.
Yeah, he doesn't care about the Champion of Wits, which I I have to agree. I don't think exiling the third copy of Champion of Wits does anything. But he is wisely identifying that he needs something special to happen to get back in this game. So perhaps trying to pave a way for Torrential Gearhulk or the Scarab God to sneak through the cracks.
Interestingly there, Mike uses Vraska's Contempt on a 2/2 zombie token because his life total is 4.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Mike will take any exchange, any safe exchange, because of his colossal advantage here is good for him. He just is trying to navigate super carefully, make sure Joe can't combo several cards together in one turn to get something through. Just navigating as carefully as possible.
Of course, any life that he gains as well could be cards, thanks to that Siphoner. Here's Liliana. Death's Majesty now on the stack. Negate from Joe. Does Mike want to fight? Yes, he does. Jace's defeat. Right back at you, Joe Stempo. And Joe says, how badly do I care about Liliana here? Well, either way, she's resolving. More advantage here for Segrist. He's going to go with the minus ability to get back the Scarab God. And look at this, Mike. 4 mana available. Bunch of cards in his hand. And his grip on this game is tightening very quickly. Joe Stempo is going to need some pretty insane stuff to get out of this. Is this Joe's last card?
Yeah, I think Mike should just let this happen because the last thing he wants is Joe to draw the Scarab God and resolve it with all of his mana. So I think Mike, again, he'll take any trade, no matter how unfavorable.
And just stay patient.
To stay patient and make sure nothing bad happens.
And it makes sense. Like, at first your instinct is, well, counter that, right?
Yeah.
That's one of your best cards. But look at this now. Okay, he let it happen. Fine, it's gone. But look, he's going to draw an extra card off of the Siphoner. Liliana Death's Majesty still on the battlefield. He's significantly ahead. All right, well, not a bad draw here for Joe, though. He's got Vizier of Many Faces. At least it's something.
I think Siggy is just surveying the scene to see if he can safely do something. I guess he doesn't have Vraska's Contempt. He doesn't have that much left to work with.
No, he's got Commit to Memory, which he's going to play the commit side of things here. And he's going to kind of lean a little bit on this Glint Sleeve Siphoner. Ooh, there's a Torrential Gearhulk, though.
So that with the commit, I think should be lights out. So let's say he attacks Stempo down to 13, makes a zombie, then Gearhulk commits the next spell. I mean, I guess Stempo's not he's not literally dead, but then his following card is Vizier of Many Faces. Okay, so I spoke too soon. It's not over. But the Gearhulk is certainly a phenomenal draw that gives Mike a lot of nice new options available to him.
Mike's counting his mana, probably to see, did I play a land yet? Am I good? All right, ships it back. Unknown card. Huh. Champion of Wits.
That's strong, actually. Because if Mike counters, Joe can just eternalize right away. And if Mike does not counter, Joe can loot 2, including binning his Vizier of Many Faces, which gives him a little bit more action. So I think Mike probably has to let it resolve. Unless he really wants Joe to spend all of his mana eternalizing.
Oh, look at this. He's going to shuffle away
Sweet.
the Vizier of Many Faces using Field of Ruin.
Very sweet.
Smart play by Mike. Okay, so that thing's gone now. And now is he going to let this resolve? You were saying, Reed, that you think probably has to just say, okay, fine.
Yeah, I would not counter it because I think that card is more devastating with the eternalized mode than it is at face value. So I like maybe Gearhulk. Okay, so Mike seems to have a plan. This tells me that he thinks he can deterministically win the game without leaving any openings, which I believe him. I'm not questioning it.
Ooh, Scarab got off of the top of the library there for Sigrist. Another one. So he gets to attack for 9 here. Knocks Joe's tempo down to 4. There's the Scarab God from Sigrist. Passes the turn back. Is there anything Stempo can draw here? Let's find out. Well, he's going to get back down to the champion now.
With only 6 mana, the Jace's defeat should be it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just cast it and he can't flash it back. He also has a Gearhulk that he can bring back. And Joe can just say go, but this is going to be it. Mike Sigrist is going to win this grind fest against Joe Stempo. Boy, this took a while to get through. We saw a lot of crazy plays in just the 2 games that we watched. The first game took as long as any of the others. But that's going to do it. Mike Sigrist is into these semifinals here in Richmond. He is going to be playing against Jose Alvarez with Black-Red. Alex Hahn with Black-Red is going to be playing against Seth Manfield on the other half of our bracket coming up in the next round. So, boy, the first 3 ones went pretty quickly there, Reed, but that last one took a while.
Yeah, let's not forget that Game 2 started with Mike well, not started, but the action really began when Mike Sigrist set up that commit your spell Torrential Gearhulk memory to reset what we believe was a mulligan disadvantage and set himself on equal footing. And from there, he navigated a super long game to winning Game 2 and then again fighting through the early siphoners and getting the advantage via Argyll's Bloodfast for Game 3.
That's right, and he ended up taking it down. We're going to have the semifinals. They're going to get seeded momentarily, but first we're going to take a short break. When we come back, semifinals, don't go anywhere.